There's a version of growth most empaths never hear about. They do the work. They set boundaries. They learn to protect their energy, walk away from toxic relationships, and call all of it healing, and it genuinely is. But Carl Jung charted a final stage of empathic development, so rare, so psychologically demanding, that the overwhelming majority of empaths will never come close to it. He called it the Sophia stage. And what stops most empaths from reaching it isn't their level of sensitivity, how deeply they've explored their shadow, or how many painful relationships they've finally left behind. It comes down to something far more uncomfortable, something most empaths won't confront even after they've faced everything else. Reaching Sophia requires surrendering the very identity that empathy gave them. Today, we'll walk through the 4 stages Jung identified, examine exactly where most empaths stall and why, explore what the Sophia stage actually looks like from the inside, and uncover the one thing empaths are most afraid to lose. If you've been doing the inner work for years and something still feels unfinished, like you've healed but not yet arrived, Jung would say you're already sensing the distance between where you are and where Sophia lives. That gap is the most important crossing of your life. Stage 1. Eve. Jung's first stage is Eve, and it's entirely instinctual. At this stage, the empath experiences the world through raw sensation with no framework to make sense of it. Emotions arrive like weather, sudden, overwhelming, impossible to navigate. They absorb the emotional states of every room they walk into. They carry other people's pain without realizing they're doing it. They can't yet tell where their feelings end and someone else's begin. Most empaths remember this stage clearly because the suffering here is the loudest. The child who felt physically overwhelmed in public spaces. The teenager who got sick around certain people but couldn't explain why. The young adult who kept drawing wounded, chaotic partners because their nervous system was wired to seek out and respond to pain. At the Eve stage, empathic ability is pure biology. The nervous system is completely open, boundaries don't exist, and there's no internal language for what's happening. Empaths here are often misdiagnosed anxiety, depression, borderline traits, codependency, because from the outside, someone drowning in other people's emotions can look like someone with a disorder. In a sense, they do have one, but it's a disorder of perception, not pathology. Their system is picking up real signals. They just have no way to organize them. The breakthrough out of Eve arrives when the empath finally learns to separate their own feelings from what they're absorbing. The moment they realize, the dread I feel every time I visit my mother isn't mine. The anxiety I carry at work belongs to my co-worker. That recognition that so much of what I feel isn't actually mine is the door out of the first stage. Many empaths treat this moment as the finish line. Jung would gently tell them they've barely started. Stage 2. Helen. The second stage is Helen, named after Helen of Troy, and it represents the romanticization of the empath's identity. Having learned to name what they are, the empath at the Helen stage builds a world around it. They study it, find community in it, and begin to see their sensitivity not as a burden but as a gift. They develop language, energy, boundaries, narcissists, and toxic dynamics. They start to feel chosen, uniquely perceptive, spiritually ahead of the crowd. Jung observed that the Helen stage is intoxicating because it replaces suffering with significance. The very sensitivity that caused so much pain becomes a source of meaning and even pride. This is where most of the spiritual empath lives. And Jung had real concerns about that, because for all the relief the Helen stage provides, it's a trap. The empath has stopped drowning, which is real progress, but they've replaced unconscious suffering with conscious identification. Empathy has become something to protect and perform, not something to keep developing and eventually transcend. Because of that, empaths at the Helen stage develop a quiet but powerful resistance to further growth. Moving forward would mean questioning the identity that rescued them from the chaos of Eve. It would mean asking, Am I using my sensitivity to avoid my shadow? Is being an empath keeping me in a victim position? Am I more attached to feeling special than to becoming whole? These questions feel like betrayal, like going backwards. But the Helen stage has a ceiling, and empaths hit it when they realize that understanding their patterns hasn't actually freed them. They know the language of healing, but they haven't experienced the transformation the language describes. That gap between knowing and being creates the pressure to enter the third stage. Stage 3. Mary. The third stage is Mary, and this is where things get genuinely hard. Named after the archetype of devoted spiritual motherhood, the Mary stage is defined by real inner work, not just identifying as an empath, but actively confronting the shadow, sitting with wounds rather than simply naming them, doing the brutal psychological labor of integration. Here, the empath begins to look at their own darkness. They see how their empathy sometimes serves their ego, how their help was sometimes controlling, how their sensitivity placed them in a quietly superior position. They face the devastating realization that their compulsive caregiving wasn't always love. Sometimes it was a transaction. I'll carry your pain if you need me. Jung observed that empaths in the Mary stage often went through what looked like a night of the soul. The narrative of the pure-hearted empath surrounded by difficult people starts to crack. They begin to see their own complicity, and unlike the Helen stage, they can't intellectualize it away. The Mary stage demands they feel the full weight of it. An empath who has truly done this work integrated their shadow, developed genuine discernment, earned authentic self-knowledge, is psychologically healthier than most people will ever be. It's a profound level of development, but it's still not Sophia. The difference between Mary and Sophia is the difference between healing and wisdom, between recovering from your wounds and transcending the framework of woundedness entirely. The Mary stage heals the empath. The Sophia stage transforms what empathy actually is. Stage 4. Sophia. So what is Sophia? Jung described it as a form of wisdom that has moved beyond personal experience into something transpersonal. The empath who reaches it has done something that sounds simple but is almost impossibly difficult. They've released their attachment to being an empath entirely. Not suppressed it, not denied it, integrated it so completely that it's no longer a separate identity. It no longer defines who they are, it simply moves through them. The difference is like the difference between saying I am angry versus anger is moving through me. One is identification, the other is awareness. That shift from identification to awareness is the threshold of Sophia. At this stage, the empath experiences perception without attachment. They can feel the full depth of someone's suffering without being consumed by it. They can see clearly without needing to fix, advise, or diagnose. They've developed what Jung called a witnessing consciousness, the ability to perceive everything without being enslaved by any of it. This isn't the soft, saccharine peace of the spiritual marketplace. It's the quiet of someone who has walked through psychological fire and come out with nothing left to burn. They've stopped fighting reality. They've stopped needing the world or other people or themselves to be different. And that is precisely why so few empaths ever get there. Because getting there requires giving up the need to heal the world. That sentence deserves a moment. The belief that they exist to help, to heal, to see what others miss and use that sight to fix what's broken. This is the core operating system of the empath at every stage before Sophia. And Sophia requires that operating system to die. Not because caring disappears. At Sophia, the empath cares more deeply than they ever have, but they've stopped turning that caring into a mission. They've stopped treating their perception as a mandate. They understand something the earlier stages couldn't grasp. Each person's suffering is their own sacred territory. Entering that territory uninvited, no matter how good the intentions, is a violation of their psychological sovereignty. Empaths at the Sophia stage can be present without being the healer. They can listen without diagnosing. They can love without needing to fix what they love. Why most empaths don't cross over? Jung identified the specific barrier that prevents most empaths from entering Sophia, and he found it in the most unexpected place. Not fear, not unresolved trauma, not lack of self-awareness. Grief. Specifically, grief over releasing the myth of the healer. Every empath carries a story about why they're here. It usually involves being a source of healing for others, the emotional stabilizer in a broken family, the one who senses what's wrong and tries to make it right. That story isn't just a narrative. It's an origin myth. It's the meaning they assign to their suffering. If I hurt this much, it must be for a reason, and that reason must be to help. Jung found this narrative to be brilliant as a survival mechanism. It transformed unbearable childhood pain into purpose. It gave the empath a reason to exist when their environment offered very few. The myth of the healer saved them, and now Sophia asks them to release it. This is why grief is the gateway. You can't think your way past this. You have to mourn the story that kept you alive and do it without immediately replacing it with a new story, a new purpose, a new identity. You have to stand in the emptiness where the healer used to be and stay there long enough for something entirely new to emerge. Most empaths feel this death approaching and retreat. They find someone else to help. They throw themselves into a new cause, a new healing project, another person's growth, because the alternative, sitting alone with their own purposelessness, is too terrifying. The conditions for Sophia. Jung identified 4 conditions that make the crossing more likely not guaranteed, but possible. The first is saturation with helping, reaching a point where enough helping, healing, and intervening makes clear that the fundamental patterns haven't actually changed. Not cynicism, but honest disillusionment with helping as a purpose. The second is confrontation with the healer's shadow, seeing, with unsparing honesty, how the healing work served the ego. The superiority embedded in always being the wise one. The avoidance embedded in focusing on everyone else's pain instead of sitting with your own. The third is the tolerance of meaninglessness, the willingness to exist without mission, without the story that suffering created a calling. This isn't nihilism. It's the psyche clearing space for meaning that arises from a deeper source than the ego's hunger for purpose. The fourth is chosen solitude, extended periods of being alone with one's own consciousness, without the distraction of others' emotional needs. Jung found that every empath who eventually reached Sophia had gone through significant periods of withdrawal, not depression, restructuring. The old operating system is being dismantled, so something entirely new could form. What Sophia actually looks like. There's something worth noting about what Jung observed in empaths at the Sophia stage. Without attempting to heal anyone, without offering insight or diagnosis, their mere presence seemed to create space for others to heal themselves. People would sit with a Sophia stage empath and spontaneously begin to see their own patterns, not because anything was pointed out, but because the empath's unattached awareness created an environment where truth could surface on its own. Jung found this deeply significant. It suggested that the empath's greatest healing power was never in their doing, it was in their being. All the years of compulsive helping were a lesser form of the gift. The real gift, the one that only emerged at Sophia, was the capacity to be so fully present, so genuinely free of agenda, that other people's psyches could relax in their presence and begin to organize themselves. The final paradox. Most empaths never reach Sophia, not because they fail, but because they stop. They reach the Mary stage, genuinely integrate their shadow, develop real boundaries, earn authentic self-knowledge, and they decide that's enough. And for most people, it is enough. There is nothing wrong with living fully in that stage. But some empaths feel a pull beyond it, something calling from past their healing, past their identity, past everything they've built, something that whispers, there's more, not more to learn, not more to heal, more to release. If you feel that pull, Jung would tell you not to chase it. Sophia can't be pursued the way you pursue healing or growth. It can only be allowed. You create the conditions. You do the releasing. You sit in the emptiness and wait, Not passively, but actively. Actively, surrendering the need to be someone, to do something, to mean something. In that active surrender, something ancient and vast begins to stir. That stirring is Sophia, the wisdom that exists beneath all the knowledge you've accumulated, the perception beneath all the frameworks you've built, the love beneath all the helping you've done. It was always there, buried beneath layers of identity, purpose, and the desperate need to make your sensitivity mean something. Sophia doesn't make your sensitivity mean something. It reveals that your sensitivity was always meaningful, not because of what you did with it, but because of what it is. Pure awareness, undistorted perception, the capacity to meet reality exactly as it is, without flinching, without fleeing, without needing to change a single thing. That capacity doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from finally, completely, letting go. Not letting go of what hurt you. You've already done that. Letting go of what saved you. That's the final paradox. The medicine becomes the last obstacle. The identity that healed you becomes the final thing that must die. And the empath who can face that, who can grieve the healer, release. The one who was always trying to make things better, enters a psychological space so vast and quiet and clear that everything they thought empathy was dissolves into what empathy actually is. Not feeling other people's pain, not seeing what's hidden, not fixing what's broken, just being present, fully, completely, unconditionally present with whatever is, and discovering that presence itself, without agenda, without identity, without purpose, is the most transformative force that exists. That's the Sophia stage.